This is a one of my latest acquisitions. This is a reissue Fender Reverb unit. It is one of the older reissues. It's one that's made in California. It's pretty close to the original. It's tube driven. If you don't know much about these, you have a signal that goes in. It basically has a small amplifier that drives a transducer that shakes a spring inside this golden pan back here. The signal is reintroduced and re-amplified, and it comes out, goes into your amplifier. But I got into this thing because the grill cloth was pretty bright. It's a silver grill cloth, and it didn't match my real Fender amplifier, so I wanted to antique it a little bit. So that's how all this started. So I'm going to pull the cover off and show you what I found inside. I have pulled the 4 screws out that hold this front panel on, and then you just pull it out like that. There's the reverb pan with the springs inside, and there's the back side of the chassis, and I'm sure you can already see one of the modifications that's been done before I got it. The original Fender Reverb units came with a 6K6 power tube. The reissues came with a 6V6 power tube. Someone has taken a old RCA tube, replaced the power tube, but I do not know what this is. I've used every trick that I know of. I cannot find any sort of number on this. I assumed that they put in a 6K6, but it might be a 6V6. I'm not sure, but both preamp tubes are the original Chinese tubes that came with the amp, so I'm going to put in some older tubes. I should also mention that I was unable to get any sort of springy, the drippy reverb, the surf reverb out of this, so I wanted to run and make sure that this was run the numbers and make sure this was the right pan when I pulled it apart. So I'm going to show you the pan that came in it. Here's the reverb pan that came out of my reverb unit. It's Accutronics. It is a made in the USA reverb pan, which is apparently good. They're all made in Korean or China now. And here is the model number. The first digit is indecipherable, but each of these numbers or letters has a meaning, and the first one for the Fender Reverb should be a 4. That means there are 2 pair of springs inside the pan, and that's what you need to get the drippy surf reverb. The other option is this could be a 9, and if it's 9, there are 3 springs, and that gives a lusher reverb, but it won't give you the short drippy reverb. And when I open it up, it has 1, 2, 3 springs inside. So someone has replaced this reverb pan from a 2-spring model to a 3-spring model. So I bought a new pan and I installed it. So I've got the correct reverb pan with the correct number of springs in it. This should give me the correct surf drip reverb that you know and love from all your favorite surf music. This is the replacement pan, also an Accutronics, also made in the USA, and you can see the code begins with a 4, which means it has 2 pair of springs inside. The last digit, which is hard to see, but here it is a C, and I know that because the box it came in also had the code in it. C means vertical mount with the connectors up, so that is correct in that it sits with the panel vertical, the connectors are up. Most people think about a Fender amplifier having the reverb flat on the floor of the amp, like in a twin reverb or in a deluxe, and the number for that is B. Now this tank that came out of the reverb that has the 3 springs, this lusher, fuller richer vibrato that doesn't have the surf drip is a B, which means it was not intended to mount vertical, it was intended to mount horizontal. And that got me thinking, because the reverb pan sits right here against the front wall of the reverb unit, but there's a lot of real estate down here on the bottom, and I was wondering, this is a lock for when you're traveling. This this lever comes forward, and what it actually does is it pushes this reverb unit against the front, and it locks it in place so it doesn't get banged around. And I wondered if there was enough room to fit this pan in the floor here if I got rid of this lock. So I'm gonna get my screwdriver, remove these two screws, and see if this pan fits. These screws have been removed. I'm gonna bring this locking lever out, and here comes the moment of truth. And it seems like there is more than enough room for this reverb pan. About a 1/4 inch clearance between the top of the tube, or the bottom of the tube, and the pan. I will have to put some isolation rubber grommets here on the bottom, but the stock pan, like I say, is mounted vertically, and it's going to fit in like this. So I think this might be a winner. So I'm going to have to rig up a switch that's going to split. This is the out, this is the in. I'm going to have to rig up a switch that will split this into 2 outputs, so I can either choose for this to go into this pan or in the front mounted pan, and for the output to likewise be switched. I guess that would be a 4-position double throw switch. Let's open up the back side of this and see how the inside of the chassis looks, and see if we want to drill or what. And here you can start to see the real difference between the original and reissue. Of course, the original would not have a printed circuit board, but the circuit is more or less identical. The capacitors don't seem bulged. I would not mess with them. If they were, I would take them to my tech to get fixed. None of the resistors seem burnt, so yeah, I don't see anything wrong with just the initial eyeballing. I'm having a time figuring out where to put the switch. I thought maybe I could put it here, kind of mirror this, the RCA in the foot switch, have the RCA plug in the switch right here. But then this is the heater wire, so this is flowing AC, so that might introduce some noise, so I don't want to put the switch there. I thought about, this is the back side of the input RCA, I thought about moving this over here so both these are on the same side and putting the switch in that hole. It would be nice and out of the way, and of course you never have to change these out. The other option I have is there's a lot of room down at the bottom. I can make a small chassis to bolt down here, have the wires run into the box, have the switch, and then the wires out to each tank. And there's actually a fair amount of room for that, so I'm gonna try to fab up a box to do that. That way I won't have to drill into the chassis. So let me go find some metal around here and start banging on it. I've been digging through the scrap bin. This is kind of what I came up with. It's just a piece of aluminum bar stock and an aluminum angle. I bent the bar stock to make a rough chassis, and I cut the bottom out so I can do all the wiring. I'm gonna braze this all together, and then this will fit right there, and if all goes to plan, this will have one in, two outs to the tank, two ins from the tank and one out back to the amp, RCA jacks, and one switch. So I'm going to get this brazed up, get some holes drilled, see if I can't mock this up, and if I can't make this work. I have drilled holes for and installed 6 RCA connectors and 1 switch, and I've wired them all up on the back side. Yucko. So what's going to happen is out in to 1 tank, to 2 tanks, from 2 tank, from 1 tank, and then there into there. And this switch will switch back and forth between the 2 tanks, so I can choose the 3-spring long reverb tank on the floor, or the 2-spring drippy tank that's going to be on the front face of the amplifier. I've mounted the second reverb tank to the bottom. I've taken my wired up little switcher box. I've also put that in with 2 screws. This is important. The reverb tank has to be secure yet floating, so what I've done is I've used 2 of these little rubber bands I've got. These are fairly specialized pieces that you might find on a farm. I've got a bag of them, and they are not what Fender used, but they're close enough. They're just little, they isolate the tank from vibration, but the tank can also move a little bit if it needs to. So I'm gonna put the chassis back in the box, get it all plugged up, and then I'm going to start making wires for this. Okay, got the chassis back in the cabinet. Before we had 1, 2, 3, 4 connectors, of course, 2 wires. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 connectors with 6 wires. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this cable and cut it up and use some connectors and make all this connection happen. So let me get on that. I've started to button this thing back up and wire it all together. As you can see, I've run into my first roadblock, and to get this far into a project and just run into my first roadblock is pretty impressive. But these RCA plugs are just too long to let this back plate seat, so try to put the back plate on. It doesn't fit here. It's all smashed up against there. So I'm gonna take this cable end off and use this 90-degree RCA plug right there and give it a little bit more clearance. So let me fire up the soldering iron and we'll get it going. And the reverb unit is gone. It's actually all buttoned to back up. I'm taking it upstairs. I've set up a few different rigs to demo through it. The first rig, I'm going to play upright bass, and then I'm going to overdub a Fender Bass 6 playing through the short reverb tank. Now the short one is the short drippy one, and that ought to give an approximation of that 1960s Nashville tic-tac bass. The Fender Bass 6 is a 6-string bass guitar. I'm going to be playing the same line on the upright, 1 octave apart, but with reverb on the Fender bass. So doom 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 goo goom 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 goo goom. Then I'm going to play the long reverb tank with my Stratocaster, which has 16 flat wounds on it. I'm going to be playing that through it, also in 1966 Showman, with the tremolo on, through a 210 cabinet that I built, and the settings on the reverb unit are going to be identical. So if you listen carefully, you can hear the difference between the short reverb tank on the 6-string bass and the long reverb tank on the Stratocaster playing the melody. So without further ado, here you go.